You're watching Bloomberg Law. I'm Lee Pacchia. The near-daily departures of partners from New York's Dewey LeBoeuf raise broader questions about the economic health of big law firms. Joining me now to discuss is Businessweek writer Paul Barrett. He wrote about the state of law firm economics in last week's issue. Welcome. Thanks for coming in.
You bet. Glad to be here.
So take us to 30,000 feet, if you could. We're seeing Dewey, where something like 70 partners have left since the beginning of the year.
Right.
Is this indicative of a broader problem in American law firms?
Oh, I think absolutely it is. I think what we're seeing now is a really broad restructuring among some of the best known brand names in American law. I mean, Dewey LeBoeuf, after all, is itself the not so long ago merger of two very well-known firms that go back many generations. And the fact that these operations are having trouble figuring out how to function profitably shows that there's a much larger imbalance in this industry.
Right. Across the board, big law firm profits were down in 2008. They were flat in 2009, and they're up slightly in 2010, but that's really only because they cut lawyers and other expenses. Can firms simply cut their way out of this situation, or does something more fundamental have to change so that we can leave this recession in big law?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, it's really important to break big law up into several pieces. The most elite firms at the very, very top of the heap, Wachtell, Lipton, Cravath, Swaine and Moore, Sullivan and Cromwell, those firms are thriving and are going to continue to thrive. So it's not as if we're going to see the world turned upside down from top to bottom. That's point number one. Point number two, smaller, boutique law firms, including those that do very high-level corporate work, are not necessarily suffering terribly either. The ones that have relatively modest overhead, that don't have huge leverage, in other words, they don't have huge paid staffs that they have to compensate month in, month out, no matter what business is like.
So where's the distress band?
The distress band is I guess, in the what you'd think of as the mid level of the AmLaw 200. Firms that have very high rates, that have very high leverage ratios, meaning many associates per partner, and firms that have laid out big guarantees to grab partners with big books of business from other law firms and now owe those partners tons of money. Those firms are getting caught in the middle. Brand loyalty to those firms on the part of corporations has eroded as all this lateral hiring has gone on, and so it's no longer clear what it means to retain XYZ law firm, even if they have a famous old name, because the partner roster, who knows where these guys are from.
Why has brand loyalty eroded over the years? Is that something that's happened in the short term, or is that a process that's been playing out for decades?
That's been going on, I would say, for at least 15 years. As the firms bulked up, as they merged, as 1,000-lawyer firms became common, the distinctions among the firms began to disappear. And also, when you take two huge firms and slam them together, whatever corporate culture you were hiring in the past, the idea of hiring particular partners who have a particular understanding of your business, well, that goes out the window.
Yeah.
You're hiring a huge company, and you're not sure who's doing your work.
At the end of the day, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar partnerships.
Right.
They're headed, for the most part, by people that are trained to be lawyers rather than business executives. Are lawyers up to the task of running America's largest law firm?
Well, this is a profound question as well, and I think this is another aspect of the structural problem that we're seeing. As you say, partnerships are not designed to cultivate leadership skills necessarily. They are really amalgamations of very small operations, 10-person operations, 20-person operations kind of stuck together. And I think it's very much open to question whether many of these operations can survive at the 1,000-lawyer level, 2,000-lawyer level without professional management, and whether, in contrast to that, you're going to see perhaps a lot of downsizing in some situations. In other situations, maybe professional management being brought in. I mean, some firms are beginning to experiment with that, with non-lawyer COOs or approaches along those lines. And I think you're going to see more of that.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a parallel to be made here with the development track that investment banking in America has been on over the last 100 years. Years ago, investment banks, of course, moved from the partnership model to that of public corporations.
Yeah.
In law, regulators have been reluctant in this country to allow law firms to develop along that path. Is that something that needs to change?
I don't know whether it needs to change, but I don't think it's going to change in that direction. lawyers still have conflict of interest restrictions that I think really make it difficult to operate at that huge level. Once you get to that level, it just becomes very difficult to sort out potential conflicts
we had
among
Lloyd Blankfein in the building earlier today talking about just that issue on the investment banking side.
Right, and for lawyers, it's even more acute. I mean, now that Goldman is a publicly traded company, its financials are public. It has to talk to the SEC. It has to talk to investors. I don't think the people who run law firms today really want to go down that path. Then there's yet another problem, which is you wouldn't be able to take advantage of much outside investing because, again, conflicts of interest would crop up very quickly between the interests of your investors and the potential interests of your individual clients if those are two completely different sets of parties. So I don't think that's where they're going. And in fact, I think the move toward gigantism is part of the problem for big-time law, that when the brand identities begin to erode, if you're not a Wachtell Lipton, if you're not a Cravath, Swaine and Moore, and it no longer is clear what it means to be with Martin, Barton, and Fargo, if that just doesn't mean anything to the world anymore, having 1,500 lawyers working there is not necessarily the answer.
There are more than 40,000 law school graduates churned out each year in a profession that has no more than 25,000 job openings, as you wrote. Is that excess capacity ultimately undermining efforts at big law firms to boost profits, or is it just a problem for unemployed lawyers?
Well, I think it's both, and I think it's yet another part of the imbalance. There's just a labor oversupply of high-end lawyers. There are too many law schools pumping out too many people with JDs. This is not to denigrate the skills of those people or how hardworking they are. It's to say that the constituency that they are educated to serve, which is, for the most part, corporations, have no need for their services. Many, many corporations have built up large in-house legal staffs. Many corporations are much more demanding now when it comes to legal fees they're going to pay for outside legal representation. And then we've got these young people who have gone to law school, racked up a lot of debt, and assume that there's a $150,000 starting job out there, and there just isn't anymore. So we actually, in a very specific way, need fewer lawyers.
Finally, let's return to the Dewey situation. In your view, can anything be done to save the firm at this point?
Well, you never want to talk a fine old institution into its grave. But on the other hand, regardless of the economics, once you begin to have the optics that you have now of so many people leaving, that has to raise such difficult questions on the part of their clients, on the part of their ability to recruit new talent, that I think the better bet at this point is that we're going to see Dewey and LeBoeuf reformulated and merged into another law firm.
I don't want to ask specific names, but are there any other firms out there that your sources are talking about as approaching a similar point that Dewey and LeBoeuf is currently at?
Yeah, I don't want to talk anybody into their grave, but I do think.
Well, I'm trying to figure out: is this a trend that we're going to see accelerate in the short term?
I think in the next couple of years you're going to see a half dozen more situations like this. I think this is quite dramatic, as you said at the outset. I don't think this is a one-off situation. We've had in the last decade, the United States law industry has lost about 15 of these great old names, and there are more to come.
This is a world in change. Paul, I want to thank you so much for stopping by today. That's Paul Barrett. He's a writer at Businessweek. If you'd like to learn more about the cases and issues we just discussed, be sure to check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Lee Pacchia. Thanks for watching.